This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it's time for Heart Mojo with Melinda Smith. But I'm not Melinda, I'm Karen Hale. I'm sitting in for her. Melinda's been on hiatus, and when we came across this guest for today, we knew that we wanted to have Erin on because Heart Mojo is about that real difficult journey that many of us go on. It could be through disease, it could be through relationship, it could be through mental illness, so many different things. And all of you out there are going through life. And some of us, I would say the majority of us, are saying, why is this happening to me? Why can't my life be like somebody else's? Much better. And as Erin and I were just talking about it, get to make a choice how you want to live your life or end your life. So, Erin Gambel, welcome to New Cleveland Radio. I know it's very early out on the West Coast, and I want everyone to know that when I found Erin on Podmatch automatically sets everything to Eastern Standard Time. So unless our guest tells us that they're not Eastern, they have to get up really early to be on the program. So welcome, and thank you for the beautiful sunshine behind you.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Sure.
It is quite early. I am an early riser, so I'm perfectly okay with that. Yeah, I'm here in California. Um, so should I tell you my story?
Absolutely, because even though I will put your bio in the show notes so everybody can see it, okay? It's wonderful to hear the story through you because you are a survivor, but there was a point in your life that you didn't want to survive. So take us on the journey.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that I'm just an extraordinary guy who went through an extraordinary experience. Um, I grew up very similar to Harry Potter in that I lived in a walk-in closet in the entryway just outside of the normal part of my parents' house. And I kind of grew up in a childhood full of a lot of emotional neglect, a lot of trauma, and a whole lot of chaos. Um, but the real turning point for me happened about 3 days before my 43rd birthday. I think prior to that, I had lived most of my life numbing myself from whatever traumas I experienced and kind of had a very victim mentality up to that point. So 3 days before my 43rd birthday, um, something completely cracked open inside of me. It started with a normal fight with my wife. Um, I had a pretty regular life. I was a blue collar worker in the film industry. I was married. I had two kids. And if you were to look at me from the outside surface level, you would think, oh, it's, perfectly happy person. But inside, I was drowning. And I had all of this unprocessed emotion and trauma that I never faced. And like I said, there was a turning point 3 days after my 43rd birthday when um, I just broke. And what had happened is, again, it started as a normal fight with my wife, and I ended up walking upstairs into my bedroom and considered ending my life. I grabbed a bottle of Xanax and counted 25 pills inside. And I looked down at those pills and I thought to myself, I could just take all of these and never wake up. And in thinking that, I, as I was raising that bottle to my mouth, an image popped into my brain. And that image was of my two kids down in the living room laughing and playing Uno. And that's literally the image that saved my life. I realized at that moment that I couldn't end my life for them. Also for myself, but mostly I was thinking of the idea that my kids would grow up without a father. That my kids would I would never be able to see them grow up. And there was something inside of me that just said, no, you're not going to do that. So the next thing that I had to do was probably the biggest decision that I've ever made as a man. And that was to put myself in the hospital. So I call a friend. He comes and picks me up and takes me to UCLA Medical Center. And I check myself into the behavioral health unit. And I spend 5 days in the hospital. And then after that, I spend 25 days at a residential treatment center. Now, when people think of treatment center, they immediately, like, at least my thought was prior to this experience, was rehab. But for me, it actually wasn't rehab. For some people there, it was. For me, I like to call it my mental health college experience
Okay.
because I actually feel like I got close to a master's in psychology during those 25 days. I learned every modality of psychology. We 6 days a week from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., every hour on the hour, we had a new facilitator that was coming and teaching us a new modality of psychology. So I learned everything from DBT to CBT to ACT to schema to emotional regulation, meditation, mindfulness, gratitude, breath work, um, yoga. I mean, we did it all. And I absolutely leaned in. I got up every single morning and grabbed my notebook and my pen, and I walked down into the decrepit old living room that was our classroom, and I just absorbed everything. And it literally changed my life. Um, After that, I realized that I was building a tool belt, that I was building these skills to emotionally regulate and to find myself and to find self-awareness. And today I use those skills every single day for myself, also for clients. Now I work as a speaker and a coach, and as a person, as a leader, to help people realize that they can take control of their stories. Um, I like to call it. I actually wrote a speech about this that's going to come out recently, and it's called "We Are Not the Stories That We Tell Ourselves."
It's very true.
Because I do believe it's true. And I want to be very clear, like I'm not denying any kind of trauma or anything that happened. Like that's not what this is about. But what I'm talking about is the relationship that we have to those things. The story that our subconscious mind applies to the situations that happen in our lives and how that then becomes our narrative. To me, that led me to, immense amounts of victimhood. And I lived a majority of my life wondering, why is this happening to me? And it took me a long time to realize that I have to look at it in the way of like, why is this happening for me? I know today that I had to go through all of those experiences, childhood trauma, the mental breakdown, the near ending of my life, and the hospital experience to be able to become the person that I am today. And I can honestly say to you that I am the happiest that I've ever been in my entire life. I'm the most in alignment with who I am and who I truly am in my heart. And that feels amazing.
So let's go back to that word you used. You're the happiest that you've ever been in your life. It's important that we all understand we can be happy, but it doesn't mean that we're smiling 24/7, that we never have a negative thought, because those thoughts will come up. But when you are truly content and happy with who you are, you can take those negative issues that come along and you can work through them. And I know I grew up believing, because I was told this by my parents and my aunts and uncles and everybody else around me, that Karen, if you make somebody happy, you're going to be happy. And so I spent the first 50 years of my life constantly trying to make other people happy, whether it be at work, my neighbor, somebody driving down the street who cut in front of me, I'd go, oh, that's okay. Whereas inside, I wasn't thinking that. But once I learned that the best way for me to make other people happy was to dig down deep inside of me, just like you did. Okay. So luckily, your kids were in the house. You heard their laughter. It reminded you, hey, I have a purpose. Two little ones sitting downstairs. And yes, you had an argument with your wife, but we all have arguments with our spouses. So sometimes we inflate them in our head.
Oh,
And sometimes we
100%.
think it's absolutely nothing. This past Sunday, my husband and I were traveling back from Kentucky, and he said something to me. My first reaction was to get mad, and I was ready to start a fight, but I caught myself. It's like, and what's that going to do for you? And once I said those words in my head, it was like, okay, so he said something, no big deal. And because I didn't react, he didn't continue along those lines. So like you, I too have a toolbox. Tell me, when you were in rehab, I'm sure there were other people, even though you were absorbing it, there are other people in the circle who were thinking that this is just a bunch of bull crap.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
How did you feel? Because sometimes, you can take on that persona of this group around you.
That's a great question. It's interesting. I realized later on that I have this sort of superpower to shift other people's perspectives or energy or whatever you want to call it. Like we can get very esoteric and woo woo out here in California, but I realize that I have this ability. So in situations like that, I don't actually attune to other people. I can shift the entire energy in the room. So to answer your question, yes, there were a lot of people like that, and it took a few days, but after a while, just by shining my light, I shifted, and I had everyone else also excited and interested, and the perspective of like this is an opportunity to like really shift our lives, and the way that the treatment worked, it kind of like there were people that were ending their time there at the same time as you're coming in, and everyone's at different levels. So there were people that would come in, and we'd start that whole cycle over again. And I don't know, there's a charisma that I carry that is infectious, and I shine my light. I live that way, and
Yeah.
it tends to work out. And I think honestly, that's where I really came to the conclusion of getting into this work that I do now in coaching. Is I have a realization that I can shift and I can inspire people, and I can turn my pain into purpose.
And it's interesting because almost every coach I've met over the last 12 years that I've been doing this show, and the last 4 years I've been doing it with Melinda. The interesting part is if you can dig deep down inside of yourself, you can find out that you truly are worthy. It may not be in the manner that you thought you should be, but we have to get rid of those should be's. So here I was for over 50 years, just doing all these things that other people implanted in me to do. And when I started to change, and I announced to my husband one day, I'm going to start a podcast. And he looked at me and said, what's that? I mean, this was 13, 14 years ago. And I said, well, it's the new thing and whatever. And he's in IT and he goes, well, then what do you need to do it? We'll just go out and buy all the equipment. And that was the first time I realized that my husband saw something in me that I had been holding back for a long time. He didn't question how much it was going to cost. And yet we didn't have the extra money to do it. But he bought me a soundboard and a better computer and speakers and headphones. And we just went the whole 9 yards. But as we were doing it, I realized this is something I've always wanted to do my whole life. I first thought I wanted to be a social worker. And my mother looked at me and said, a social worker, they're at the bottom of the barrel. You're going to hear everybody's problems. You don't want to be a social worker. Then I said, I wanted to be a broadcaster. Well, this was in the late 60s. And she said, Karen, there are no women broadcasters. Who do you think you're going to be? Come on, go become a teacher. Well, obviously, I got my degree in communications, but for a long time, there was no place to use it. And once I found, hey, here's a place to use it, I started changing. And the point I'm getting at is that many of us end up as coaches and podcasters and bloggers and influencers because of what we've experienced. And when I first read your bio, my thought was, oh, this is so sad. But I reread it again today and I was smiling because it was like, it's sad at the time, but look who you've become.
Exactly. It's really interesting. I have a great story about how I got, aside from that. But thank you for saying that, by the way. I really appreciate that. That warms my heart because the whole mission and the whole thing is for me is to be real and to be raw and to be vulnerable and to let people know that I'm just an ordinary guy who went through an extraordinary experience. And that if I can do it and I can come out of that dark night of the soul and see the light at the end of the tunnel, like so can you. So can anyone else. It just takes a little bit of grit and a little effort and a little bit of understanding that like we can do this. Um, but I'd love to tell you the interesting story of how another reason on how I
Sure.
got to coaching, if it's interesting, because I think it applies similar to what you were saying. And I worked for 15 years. I worked in the film industry, and I had a very blue collar job. I was a camera assistant, and a part of my job is to monitor the focus of the camera as you're filming. So a really great example of my job is if you've ever watched a movie or a TV show and it slightly got out of focus, not in a creative way, that's somebody in my position messing up. And that was the best that they got. So a part of my job is really being very present and very aware and watching how the actors and the director and are working out the scene that they're going to do. And for years, this interesting thing would happen to me where we would be waiting and observing and watching as the actor and the director are working together to figure out what's going to happen in this in filming this scene. And these, older, crew members would come up to me and just have a sense of safety, I guess, and would just start telling me their personal stories about everything in their life that they've never told a therapist before. And it just kept happening. Years and years and years would go by. I had this assistant that was my like sort of like my partner, and he had this very interesting way of being like, "Hey, buddy, it's time to get to work. Like we have to stop talking and do our jobs now." And that was his very sarcastic way of kind of pulling me out of this conversation because I loved the conversation. I loved being in it. But at the same time, I really need to pay attention to this
Yeah.
thing that's happening over here. This is now getting in the way of my job and getting in the way. And as a freelancer, if you're not doing your job, you're not getting hired. So I then started thinking, I was like, well, this is happening to me all the time. That there's something to that. Like there's something that I inherently have this ability to hold space and to create a safe space for people that have never talked about their deepest, sort of things. How can I now turn that into a career? And that's what led me down the avenue of leaving the film industry and living a more purpose-driven life and becoming a coach and becoming, a person that is able to help other people be their best version of themselves.
You know, it's interesting because as you talk about the work you were doing, there are probably many people sitting out here going, oh boy, he was in the film industry. Oh, he walked away from it. How could he walk away from it? And it's interesting because I have family in the film industry, the music industry, and as much as they love it, they have said, you know what, there's got to be something other than what I'm doing. Um, and until you get that push that says, this is something else that I can do, you're going to stay there. Now, there's nothing wrong with staying there, but you have to understand why you're staying wherever you are. Um, and, maybe if you hadn't had those earlier traumas in your life, okay, maybe you would have been a different person and people wouldn't be coming up to you to talk to you. But
Yeah.
there was something that happened in your life that brought you to that situation that people would come to you and talk. And then you started to realize, hey, there's got to be more for me too. How do I do this? So I don't care what your age is, whether it was 43, 53, or 103, you can still make the changes that is your true self.
Yeah.
So you brought up something in your bio that when you went into treatment, your wife came and picked you up and asked for a divorce.
She didn't actually pick me up.
Okay.
She came to visit me 2 days after being in the hospital before treatment,
Okay.
not to necessarily offer me support, but to actually just inform me that she's filing for divorce. And it couldn't be I'll just put it this way, the timing wasn't very great. Um, yeah, that was the kind of the pinnacle that ended my marriage and my life that I had up to that point. Not my physical life, but the life that we had created, the family, the house, the two kids, the picket fence, the quintessential life. And to be absolutely honest, it was one of the best things to ever happen to me. That was another realization that I was not living my true life, that I was lost in this sort of fantasy of what you're supposed to do when you get older, and I had lost myself. I was living in a very codependent relationship, and I was had lost touch with who I really am. So a lot of this process really is sort of like the beginning of my journey and the beginning of sort of the awakening to myself.
So many of us, when we would read that, we'd think, oh, how terrible this was of her. But she was going through her own journey. Okay.
Yes.
And her journey at that point said, I got to get out. And I bring this up for a very special reason. I've also been through a divorce. And when I went through my divorce, of course, my upbringing got me to point the finger at him. And I did it for years and years and years. And it wasn't doing me any good, but I kept hoping that the next time I pointed the finger at him, I'd feel better. And when I went through my own transformation in my 50s, all of a sudden I thought, he gave me a gift. I never would have asked for the divorce, but when he asked for it, I'm so grateful. And I thought to myself, this took me 30 years to admit that I'm grateful, but I'm glad that I finally got to that point. Now I can look at him and talk about him in a positive way. How is it for you, your ex-wife, and your kids now that you've gone on this journey and you're transforming your life?
That's a great question. Fantastic. My kids are thriving. And it took me a really long time to kind of put this together. I talked a little bit about my history. I came from a divorced family already. I had a stepmom and a father, and they were very, emotionally immature people. They still are today. And for me, one of the biggest stories that I would tell myself is that if I got a divorce, I was a failure. And that I would be repeating the same generational traumas that I experienced when I grew up. And that, as a father and as a husband, would literally be a failure. And it took me a really long time to realize that actually, two happy homes are far better than one toxic home.
Yes.
It's better for the kids, it's better for the parents, it's better for each individual person, my ex-wife and me. And now, we're thriving in a hybrid version of a family. We split our time with our kids 50-50, and my ex-wife lives a mile away from me. And we, they we have a schedule where my kids spend 3 or 4 days at their mom's house, and then they spend 3 or 4 days at my house. And we have this thing, it's called the 2-2-5. It's a
Yeah.
pretty normal schedule, but it ends up working out great because, you know, the kids get enough time with each parent to not hit that sort of breaking point. And being a solo parent is incredibly challenging. And or let me rephrase that. Being a co-parent is incredibly challenging. Um, but we found a system that works amazing. And to go back to really like kind of to touch on what you were saying, it was a true gift. And I know that I had to go through that experience again to get where I am and to see how I had lost touch with myself. Not only for myself, but like to be a better father,
Sure.
to show up, in a different way with intention. Rather than life, living me, I am now living life. And I'm in control of my own narrative.
If more of us could understand that we're the ones who have control. And I know we like to blame others for our loss of control. My youngest son was born on the autism spectrum, very high functioning. But he grew up during a time when, from the early 90s, nobody understood really what autism was, other than they thought it was a disease and you're disabled and you're not good enough. And here was this kid who looked and acted very neurotypical. However, his social skills were not meeting his age range. By the time he became 18, he was more like 15. By the time he was 20, he was 18, and on and on. And now that he's a young adult, nobody can tell the difference, other than he still feels all this baggage that he grew up with, and he's trying to shed it. And I tell him and the parents that I work with who have any kind of mental health issues in their family, neurological issues, you got to meet the person where they are. You got to let them be themselves. And oftentimes in a marriage and as a parent, we give up being who we are. You were trying to please your wife, you were trying to please your kids. Part of that was going to work every day, maybe in a situation that wasn't the best for you. And that all accumulated. But if we aren't vulnerable and share with others, all they're going to see is the meltdown. Luckily for you and me and many others who have become coaches, we admit we had those meltdowns. We admit these are the things that trigger us. That's why we can help coach others.
Yeah.
So how do you find, or how do your clients find you?
Well, I have a pretty thriving Instagram account, Aaron Gambel, or at Aaron Gambel. Also, my website is aarongambel.com. I'm currently taking one-on-one clients for a program that I have that's called Rewriting Your Story. I also am in the building blocks, early stages. I haven't quite launched yet, but I have a fatherhood program that I am going to help. It's a group program that I'm going to help men who just found out that they are going to be a dad, and walk them through or support them in the process of stepping into fatherhood.
And most men don't get that training.
There's nothing out there like this, so I'm really excited about it. I enjoy. I love being a father. So it's something that I want to share with other people.
You know, it's interesting because my first husband and I, we got married very young. We were both 21 years old. And in now looking back, we were babies and we were getting married because the families thought we should get married. But when we had our child together, we were 25, 26 years old. And he did not know how to be a dad. And I did not know how to even help him be a dad because I wanted to be the mom. So I did absolutely everything. And then when he didn't do certain things, I used to get mad. And I look back at it now and realize, wait a second, was it his fault he didn't do it? Or was it my fault because I just did it all? And I realized I did the exact same thing when I remarried and we had a child. And same thing, I just expected, I'm mom, I should do it all. And recently we've talked about the fact that in some ways I'm closer to our younger son because I did it all. And, you know, I think your class is going to be phenomenal because we just assume that men know as much as women do about birthing and having children and raising them. And the reality is, you know, sometimes you just have to get that little nudge and know there are other dads out there that are struggling like you are.
Yeah. Well, and what you're kind of speaking on is something that's a big part of my program is I'm a really big advocate of parental modeling. So what happens is in our formative years from 2 to 7, 8, that's when we are informed by our parents on how a relationship dynamic should be, how you show up as a parent, how you show up as in a relationship, how you treat men or women. And that informs us unconsciously later down in life when we step into those roles. So what ends up happening, it's a conversation that no couple has before having a parent, is talking about how you were grown up, how you were raised. Was your dad the sole provider and not a caregiver? And was your mom just the caregiver? And if that's the dynamic, you're subconsciously either going to do one of two things. You're going to show up with that exact same way, or you're going to do the opposite, depending on how you grew up. Now, what happens is when you take that father and that mother And if they both had similar upbringings where, use the same example, that dad was the provider and mom was the caregiver, it's going to naturally gel. But if mom, say for example, grew up in an environment where mom was the provider and dad was more of the caregiver, that expectation now is going to be passed on to that partner. And that's where resentment starts to set in, or expectations start to set in that they're gonna show up in a way that they didn't know they were supposed to show up from the perspective of that other person. So it's a really fascinating thing that I think that we are really informed by how our parents modeled for us. And it shows up in so many ways that is completely unconscious.
Well, we have to stop and think about it, that whether it's biological parents, step parenting, adoptive parenting,
Yeah.
other family members, whoever you spend those young years with, you're witness to their behaviors. And my current husband, we've been married 41 years, so it's not like it's a new marriage or anything. But right in the beginning, he would say to me, when you get upset, why do you yell and scream? And I said, do I? And he goes, yeah. I said, no, I don't think so. We went to visit my parents the following weekend, and my parents were totally in love with each other, but they bickered all the time. And their voices would get louder and louder. And my husband, when the tone started getting high, he would excuse himself and he'd go to the drugstore. He'd go out for a while. When he came back, everything was calm again. And it finally dawned on me, I know why. I'm modeling after my parents. I see them hugging and kissing and telling each other they love each other, but they bicker and they raise their voices. And I said, I don't know how to do it differently. It's taken me almost 41 years of our marriage to finally get to the point of I'll hear my voice going up and I'll say, just give me a minute and I'll pull back. Now he's not used to that. It's like, just get it out already, But you are so right that we are so dependent on what we learn as children. And even though we think, hey, I'm independent, I'm not taking any of that with me, we do.
We definitely do. And one of the amazing things that I think is awareness, right? You had that awareness that is something that showed that was there for you all of your life, and that you took that on, right? And excuse me. And making that shift, although it may not be super easy, you still were able to make the shift, right? And that's what's important. But imagine somebody who's just getting into a marriage or is just getting into parenthood, and to be able to have that conversation and to be able to learn what you and your husband did 40 something years later, before stepping into the throes of parenting.
Right.
Like, that's just gold information to be able to understand and to look and go, wow, okay, so your parents like that. So when we're in a heated argument, this is how you're probably going to react. How can we now make micro adjustments to not allow that to escalate, or to shift the conversation, or to take each other out of the situation, to be able to self-regulate and then come back to the conversation? Like, to me, that can save marriages.
And the key word was there, micro adjustments.
Yes.
Because sadly, when we are in a relationship and we see something that we don't like in the other person, we want them to change. And taking that giant step for most of us is not going to happen. Okay. Because we'll take it and then we're going to slip all the way back. I truthfully have seen a difference in myself since I started my work, that I take those small steps. I don't make that big promise. Okay. But I don't even say I'm going to try. What I say to myself is, I'm going to take that small step. And once I'm there, I'm going to look it back and I'm going to look forward and realize, can I stay here? Is this okay? Or do I need to inch forward again? And I have many clients who will get very frustrated with me because they'll say, well, I just want this to be fixed. Well, you got to take time. This didn't happen overnight, whatever that behavior is. So don't expect that your coach is going to wave a magic wand and you can take the giant step and everything's going to be fixed. So again, tell me how people can get in touch with you and tell us a little bit more about what's coming up, because I want to follow that and have you back when your program is complete.
Yes. Again, you can find me on Instagram and also I have a smaller TikTok, but it's Aaron Gambel, Aaron M. Gambel on Instagram. And I have a website that's aarongambel.com. And yeah, if you're interested and this resonates with you, I'm currently taking clients and have an amazing program for rewriting your own story
I love it.
and stepping into your power.
Well, we all have the power to do it. We just have to make the commitment to take that first micro step.
Yes.
Thank you, Aaron, and go enjoy the beautiful day. Okay.
I'm going to. Thank you so
All
much
right.
for having me on. This was
Thank
amazing.
you. Talk to you soon. Bye bye
All
now.
right. Bye-bye.